Every place where we come through, there was lots of trucks. Weyburn, there must have been 250 trucks waiting, and every town that we come in, there was more joining every time. I think everybody's sick of the government that's ruining us. Other than that, everybody's just here to try get rid of this carbon tax. Why doesn't the federal government do like our provincial government? I got 20% back on my solar system. Why doesn't the federal government also give us an incentive to put this in? Instead of giving money to other countries to stop carbon, why doesn't he give everybody in Canada a chance to do like I'm doing?
We have a lot of members that are going to be negatively impacted by a carbon tax in the province of Saskatchewan. A lot of our guys rely on fossil fuels, unfortunately, to build Saskatchewan's highways and transportation networks. So there's a lot at stake here in terms of jobs and competitive advantage or disadvantage in this case for our members. We're looking at well over $1 million in additional expenses for the industry that's unfortunately going to be, offloaded onto the taxpayers because the major procurer of our service is government, whether it's provincial, federal, or municipal. So ultimately, the taxpayers are going to be, facing a heavier burden because of this.
But we're going to make polluters pay and put money in your pockets.
There is an imperative to put a price on pollution, and if there are costs associated with for average families, we will more than compensate those families for those costs.
Well, how are they going to do that? They talk about this rebate as if you're going to get the money back, and then you're going to get a premium, so you're going to get even more money back. How do they calculate that, though? That was a part that was lost from the conversation.
Let me sort of describe my overall policy. What I've said is that we would put a cap and trade system in place that is as aggressive, if not more aggressive, than anybody else's out there. I was the first to call for 100% auction on the cap and trade system, which means that every unit of carbon or greenhouse gases was emitted would be charged to the polluter. That will create a market in which whatever technologies are out there that are being presented, whatever power plants that are being built, that they would have to meet the rigors of that market and the ratcheted down caps that are imposed every year. So if somebody wants to build a coal-powered plant, they can. It's just that it will bankrupt them because they're going to be charged a huge sum for all that greenhouse gas that's being emitted.
We shall fight on the beaches. We shall fight on the landing ground.
Thank you for joining us. You are listening to A Radio, and this is The Morning Moment. We're on weekdays, 11:45 Eastern. Follow us on Spreaker.com and click on the like button. I'm going to play to you two pieces today. One's from Fox News. It's from Fox and Friends, September 5. It concerns climate change. Now I have to say my piece here. We in Canada are already suffering under the weight of a carbon dioxide tax on everything. And these taxes are only going to increase. But for some reason, Americans seem to think this is a good idea. It's not. It destroys jobs, lives, and your way of life. If 57 Genders Trudeau here in Canada gets back into office this October, when we have our general election, Canadians can only expect more of the same indoctrination. We have suffered terribly as a country from the ideology of one party hell-bent on implementing Agenda 2030. Food prices here have already seen an increase this year alone of 20%, and the quality of the food has dropped dramatically. Gasoline, because of the despicable UN French-mandated metric system, that's what I believe and I'm sticking to it, which disguises the real cost of gasoline, has increased to $4.75 a gallon on average, and even higher in some parts of the country, such as the east coast of Canada. Ironic when you consider there's oil there. There are windmills everywhere, polluting everyone's view of scenic areas, solar farms in the most unlikely areas, even though they can't function most of our winter, because, by the way, our winter lasts for more than 6 months. Having said that, The march to socialism continues in Canada, driven by its media, supported by all politicians, and backed by all tiers of education. Not a recipe for success, I would suggest. So, with that in mind, I'm going to play a clip, as I said, from Fox and Friends, and then I'm going to introduce you to a second clip. This is from Mark Levin, which was his episode September 4, I believe. In his opening monologue, he was talking about socialism and, surprisingly enough, Agenda 2030. Finally, I have to say this for the record. Everything he says in his piece about Agenda 2030 and socialism and socialists, ditto Canada. Everything he says about government expanding, as he lives near Washington, ditto here. And everything he says about control, you can be assured it's already happening here in Canada and many other Western countries. Be under no illusion, this is real. If you want to see it, come and visit your northern neighbour. It's a day trip for many, and it would certainly open your eyes. That's if you want your eyes opened. Maybe you don't. Maybe you're happy to settle for the government controlling your lives. Oh, and by the way, it's very difficult to own guns in Canada. That sounds very familiar to what some policies are being pushed in the United States right now, doesn't it? Here are those pieces, and I would welcome your thoughts. Links on my site, as usual, while they remain up there, of course.
And try to pass. So we'll keep you posted on that. In the meantime, straight ahead, 2020 Democrats going all in on climate change during a 7-hour town hall.
We are fighting for the survival of the planet.
This is on par with winning World War II, perhaps even more challenging than that.
We need a blue New Deal as well.
Our next guest says if we relied on the Democrats, we'd be doomed.
Life on Earth is at risk.
Climate change, the single greatest concern for war. We are fighting for the survival of the planet Earth.
It is a monumental crisis.
It is about an existential threat to who we are as human beings.
The UN has told us that we have about 12 years to get this right, or the consequences could be catastrophic.
Well, 2020 Democratic presidential candidates going all in on climate change during CNN's Climate Crisis Town Hall last night. Here to react is the executive editor of ClimateDepot.com and author of the Politically Incorrect Guide to Climate Change, Mark Morano, who watched it for 7 hours and survived. So, Mark, tell us, what are the highlights? I didn't watch it. I didn't have 7 hours for this.
Well, don't worry. I watched it so you didn't have to.
Well, thank you.
Well, the highlights of this were quite simply the Democratic candidates stood on the stage at CNN last night and literally talked about who was going to tax, spend, and regulate the American economy into saving the planet. Now, I'm going to give a spoiler here. Bernie Sanders wins. He was at over $16 trillion, followed by Kamala Harris at about 10, and then you drop way down to Elizabeth Warren in the 3, and then Joe Biden, one of the biggest losers, only wants to spend $1.6 trillion. The real question is, why didn't Bernie say 30 million or 45 trillion? Why didn't they just keep upping the numbers? But that was the bottom line. They came up with who could regulate and spend the most and who would save the planet. And I would say this, after hearing this for 7 hours, one thing's for certain. If we actually faced a climate crisis and we had to rely on their carbon taxes and cap and trade and multi-trillion, we would all be doomed if we had to rely on them to save us. And that's
why do you say that? Why do you say that?
Because even former Secretary of State John Kerry's admitted this, the EPA numbers have admitted this. Whatever the United States does would not even impact climate, let alone U.S. emissions. It's basically a grand gesture in futility in terms of what we do. Even the EPA models, which are based on the UN science claims, would have no impact on the temperature 100 years out. So what they're doing is basically saying we're going to regulate the economy. We're going to make all these increases. And one of my favorites was they're going to regulate and prosecute energy companies who are providing our energy. And then at the same time admitting they're going to raise energy costs. Well, then we're going to give guaranteed incomes. We're going to redistribute wealth to the people out of it. So you're going to have the Democrats basically on one hand regulating our economy, on the other, giving the money back to who they deem necessary in a massive redistribution scheme. It's the ultimate plan for them because they get to be the masterminds of our economy by regulating every aspect of it in the guise of this climate emergency, which CNN used the term liberally, climate emergency.
And here they are, Mark, talking about just that.
Sure.
We got to start choosing science over fantasy here.
You have countries, island countries on the other side of the world that are literally sinking underwater.
There's no question I'm in favor of banning fracking.
If you can get electricity from a light bulb that utilizes 1/10 of the power that an old incandescent light bulb used, of course you're going to do that.
Out of curiosity, Mark, how many times did Hurricane Dorian, which is creeping up our East Coast, how many times did that come up?
It came up actually more so with CNN. Wolf Blitzer and others just stated it as fact that Dorian was a result of man-made climate change, despite the fact that it's tied for three-way in terms of wind speed, and it's ninth in terms of strength. I mean, there's no evidence. Hurricane Dorian's unprecedented in any way, but yet they're claiming that was part of it. Interestingly enough, Bernie Sanders, in claiming the climate emergency, brought up abortion. He brought up overpopulation. He brought up a whole area of issues. The tipping point was repeated over and over. 11 years. And we go back to the 80s. The UN gave a 10-year tipping point. So that was mentioned as though it was some kind of fact that we had 10, 11 years to solve this.
They also brought up big oil and eating cows and Mayor Pete's private jets. It was a busy 7 hours. Mark, thank you very much for joining us live with a recap.
No problem, Steve. Thank you.
All right. Coming up, we're going to...
There's a piece in Politico, which is a very liberal so-called news website, and a piece written by Michael Calderon, who's a liberal, called Will Media's Climate Change Blitz Take Root? Now, think about that title. Man, we got a lot to cover today. I'll move from here and there, but I want to spend a little bit of time on this. Will media's climate change blitz take hold? What? Right in the title, there's a confession that the media are hysterically and desperately pushing the climate change ideology. Now let's step back before I get into the rest of this article. What is climate change about? It's the old red movement dressed up as a green movement. It is anti-capitalism. And again, the scholarship that I did on this is really quite clear. It's unassailable. Like Marxism, like so-called democratic socialism, this is imported from Europe. Most specifically, it's imported from Germany. This ideology. And what it's about, ladies and gentlemen, is hijacking the environmental movement, hijacking the issue of health and safety, and camouflaging it on behalf of socialism/Marxism. Now think about the climate change movement. What is it all about? An enormous power grab by the federal government, politicians and bureaucrats. And of course, most of the media live and operate inside and around Washington, D.C., inside and around New York City. So this is about the further concentration of power. I live about 40 miles, give or take, from Washington, D.C. in Virginia. And when my wife and I went to the National Archives on Labor Day, I go to Washington now and then. I just want you to know, the rest of the country, I want you to know, the amount of money, the billions of dollars that's being spent on the Metro Rail system to bring it out 30, 35 miles from Washington, D.C., the billions of dollars being spent on the widening of roads, on bridges in and out of Washington, D.C., I've never seen anything like it. This is without a quote-unquote $2 trillion infrastructure project. The building, the population growth, the income in and around Washington, D.C. and those counties is beyond belief. The developments that's going on, townhouses, condominiums, single-family homes, it just keeps spreading from Washington, D.C., through the inner suburbs of Virginia and Maryland to the outer suburbs of Virginia and Maryland. It's massive. The amount of redistribution of wealth from people in all other parts of the country into the Washington, D.C. metropolitan area is enormous. Enormous. And it's not just the bureaucrats. It's those who feed off the federal government, the contractors, the associations, the think tanks, the ethnic front groups, the unions, the Chamber of Commerce. It just never ends. It's enormous. And just imagine if they can nationalize climate, where the federal government now can do anything and everything as long as it links it to climate change. There's no end to this. Imagine, in addition to nationalizing healthcare, nationalizing education, nationalizing debt of all sorts. Imagine that, plus the federal government, politicians having the power to act and do pretty much whatever they want under this rubric of climate change. And the media are not merely reporting on this. The media are advancing this. The media are prodding this. The media are pushing this, just as they've been pushing impeachment. And they'll get back to that next week when Congress returns. Mark my word. So this piece in Politico, and by the way, if they succeed on this climate change issue, your lives will change forever. That's what the Green New Deal is all about. It's a Red New Deal. Everything in your home itself, your automobile, the clothing you wear, the job you have, all of it will be affected. All of it will be monitored. All of it will be regulated to make you poorer, to make you less independent, to make you less free. That's what it's about. Creating a nation of zombies, of drones. Uniformity. How many times do I say this?
You can find more at aradio.wordpress.com, where you can find links to us on Twitter, Facebook, Instagram, iTunes, iHeartRadio, Gab, and email. We are also on Spotify. Just go to the podcast section and type Canadian Politics with a twist, and you'll find us. We are continuing to reach out to you, so please pass on the links. Please click on the follow button on Spreaker.com. You can listen to all our morning moments at Spreaker.com under A Radio. That's EHRADIO, A Radio. And please click on the like button. And you can now hear a weekend review of our podcasts on WHBJ DB, News Talk Radio. Join us and many others. And you can find all our podcasts and morning moments at aradio.wordpress.com. Click on the Morning Moments tab.